So in Matthew chapter 13, Jesus tells a parable. There was I think I messed that up. There we go. There was a sower, and he went out to sow his seed. And as he sowed the seed, some of it fell on the hard path. And as it did, it couldn't penetrate the soil, so the birds of the air came and ate it up. Some of it fell on some rocky soil, and it didn't have much soil there, so it sprang up quickly, but then when the sun came out, it kind of scorched it, and it dried, and it withered. Some fell in the area where there were thorns, and it grew up with the thorns, but as it grew up with the thorns grew up with it and choked it out, and it died. And some fell on good soil, and as it fell on good soil, then it produced a good crop. Looking back at that parable after years of study and years of hearing that parable, we say, well, that's pretty easy to understand, right? Well, the disciples, when they heard it, they didn't understand it at all. In fact, they went to Jesus and said, hey, can you explain that to us? And Jesus, as he explains it, he says, don't you understand this parable? How then will you understand any parable? And it wasn't so much of a rebuke, it was just him saying, how can you not grasp these concepts? And actually to understand, and the words that we use for understand, there are two different words. One means that you grasp something by intellect so that you can intellectually figure it out. And the other one means that you know something by experience. So they couldn't figure it out with their mind, and they didn't understand it from experience. Then Jesus fed the 5,000. I think it's 4,000. Anyway, after he feeds the 4,000, he gets in a boat. I don't know if it's 4 or 5. You'll have to go back and look this up, all right? I get confused sometimes. He fed 4,000 once, 5,000 once the other time, and I don't remember which one this is. It's okay, isn't it? Just find it in your own Bible. But here's the deal. Right after he does that, he jumps in a boat, and he goes across the sea. Well, they get on this side of the sea, and in one gospel, the other one, they're kind of on the way, so I don't know exactly where that happened. But the disciples figured out they only had one loaf of bread. And Jesus says, because he's just had this interaction with Pharisees and the Sadducees who say, we want to see a sign. And he said, watch yourselves. Be on your guard against the use of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And they thought, I think he's fussing at us because we didn't bring any bread. And he said, why are you arguing about not having any bread? Do you not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear? And remember, he said, don't you remember what I just did? I just fed 4,000. I'm not worried about bread. Sometimes, as I go through my spiritual journey, I feel exactly like the 12. I'm trying to figure things out. I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to grasp spiritual concepts, and they're just not taking hold. I just can't seem to figure it out. Or if I can figure it out, I just can't remember to do it. Or I get confused, or I start looking at the wrong thing, or I draw the wrong conclusion. Have you ever gone through your spiritual life thinking, I am just not getting it? It's just not sinking in. And sometimes I feel like those 12. I think if Jesus could give me a message, he would probably look at me in that boat and say, Greg, do you just not get it, buddy? Do you just not understand? If you can't understand this, how are you going to understand anything else? If you can't understand, how are you going to tell anybody? And I think sometimes as we go through life, we're kind of like that. We're kind of like that. And I think there's a couple of reasons that it can happen. And I want to talk to you about those this morning, and maybe we can kind of move past some of those. The title of this is When We Just Don't Get It. When we just don't get it, or it just doesn't sink in. I could come up with a great title. That's the best I could do. Sometimes we don't understand because we've got a closed, impenetrable heart and mind, and that can just cause this lack of understanding. Now, let me explain it this way. So after the parable of the sower, Jesus explains it, right? And we don't need to go through the explanation for this, but Jesus explains the parable of the sower. And then after he explains the parable of the sower, he tells them, he said, to you the secrets of the kingdom have been given. But then he starts talking about people. And he says, in their case, the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled that says, I think I put it up here in a slide, you will indeed hear but never understand, you will indeed see but never perceive, for the heart of this people has grown dull, and they barely hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Now that's kind of an interesting verse. And we can't get into everything about that verse this morning. I just want to get into this part. This is a quote from Isaiah chapter 6, verses 9 and 10. There's a couple of things that are said in there. One, that this idea of grown dull, it's like, originally it was a word that was used of water, something that was impenetrable by water. Water couldn't get through it. I tried to figure out a way to illustrate that. I started to get my waders and stand in the water and say, you see the waders, because water can't get through the waders, right? They can't penetrate through there. But then I thought that's probably not a good thing to do while I'm wearing a microphone, because if it were to shock me, it would probably hurt. And then, you'd probably get a really good sermon out of that, probably get a YouTube video. It might go viral. Who knows, right? So I decided I shouldn't do that. So then I was trying to think, how can I really illustrate that? And to be very honest, I couldn't come up with anything. I tried. If you can come up with something, just shout it out. Okay, this is church, and it's okay. If you want to say something, it's all right for you to say something. But you just can't penetrate it. It just can't get through there. I thought about vehicles. And you got seals, so liquid can't get out or oil can't get out. Or I thought about a crock pot. You seal that thing down to keep the heat in. Thought about all kind of things. When something just can't get into something or can't get out of something, and here the heart is so dull that things just can't get into it. It's originally from this word that means to grow fat. It just grows. It grows fat. It grows dull. And kind of an Aramaic word that they use here means to make foolish or to be unfeeling or insensitive. You kind of get the idea. Luke uses a different word when he does this. Mark uses a different word in his gospel. It means to harden something or for something to be even petrified, difficult to understand or comprehend. Do you get all of that? The heart of the people is just so that the word just can't get in there. It just can't penetrate the heart. It won't go into the mind. And we say, well, we're never really like that, are we? Man, can you just close your heart and close your mind to God's message? You just become so calloused, so self-centered, so focused on what you want that you just don't listen. And sometimes we are that way. We want to say we're not, but sometimes we are just that way. Because sometimes God's telling us stuff that we don't want to hear. We don't want to listen to it because we don't really want to hear it to begin with. Especially, don't lie. Don't steal. Be sexually pure. No sex outside of marriage. No adultery. No pornography. Love others. Always? Yeah, always. Love other people. Keep a pure heart. Isolate your heart. Guard your heart. And sometimes we don't want to hear those kind of messages. And our heart becomes hard, and we become so self-centered, we become so centered on the things of the world that our heart, it just gets so hard that God's word can't penetrate it. And we find ourselves, just like Jesus was talking about the people that he was trying to teach the message to, we find ourselves like that seed that's on the road, and the ground is just so hard that God's message won't come through. This is not just about the parable of the sower. Pull some other verses, but there is another one in the parable of the sower. Sometimes Satan obsesses over blinding your understanding of God's truth. I mean, do you realize that? Do you remember the parable? when Jesus explained it? Because Satan comes and snatches it away. Do you know that's what he wants? He wants to snatch God's word out of your heart. Of all the things that he wants for you, you thinking the way God wants you to think is at the very bottom of his list. He wants you to be filled with all kind of misinformation and false information so that you will not listen to the message of God. And that is his goal. And we look out in our world. You think there's any false information about God? False information about God. How about our world that says, God just really doesn't exist? Maybe there's some kind of cosmic power, or maybe there's something, but there's not really, God's just not really out there. And if God really were out there, God didn't really care about you. False information. Misunderstandings about God. A world that says, well, if you got to choose between theories, scientific theories are better than religious theories. Or all science disputes God. You got all kind of false teachings about Jesus, right? What do you believe? What do I believe? Jesus is the Son of God. I believe that with a passion. Jesus is the Son of God. Those voices in the world that says, there's not really anything like the anger or the wrath of God. God really won't punish anybody. God really wouldn't send anybody to hell. There is really no hell. There's just heaven. False teaching about God. Worship really isn't that important. It doesn't really matter if you get it. And again, if you're listening live stream, you don't want to get up because of COVID. It's not directed at you, but there is this thought process in our world that says worship's not really important. Gathering as God's people is not really important. I can do it by myself in a boat or in a golf course. What Satan wants more than anything else is to blind your heart, blind your mind so you can't understand what God's truth is. Sometimes he does that with false information. Sometimes he does it by distraction, doesn't he? Satan has this ability to distract you away from the things that are really important. Now, he does that in a lot of ways. He does it with hobbies, right? And the right is, you just have to say right. Can God distract you with hobbies? Anybody gotten into a hobby? You're so excited about the hobby that you kind of forgot about everything else. You can do that, can't you? Now, are hobbies bad? No, hobbies aren't bad. This isn't an anti-hobby sermon, right? Hobbies aren't bad. They're just bad if you let them get out of perspective. How about sports? Anybody like playing sports? I like playing sports. I'm not good anymore, and I got a bum knee. I got to go get that fixed. I'm not good. I kind of enjoy playing. I have found out through CIY trips that tennis is out from now on, right? No more tennis. Those that went to CIY with me will understand this. No more tennis. I am on a permanent waiver from softball. Did y'all know I'm on a permanent waiver from softball? I'm on a permanent waiver from softball and serious basketball. And I can only play those if Diane signs off on the waiver because she's the one who has to come to the emergency room to pick me up. And the last time we were in the emergency room, she said, no more unless I agree. So no more of that, right? Man, do you like watching sports on TV? I love college basketball. In fact, we got to get out of here by 11 because Memphis plays Houston at 11. That's a must-win game if they're going to get to the tournament, which is not likely. But, y'all got to finish this thing up. Or working on an old car. Or a career. Even family, right? The ways that God can distract us and move us off center. Satan can distract us and move us off center and get us to the wrong place. There's another part of that, and it's kind of don't be afraid to ask for help, but here's kind of the point. Mark chapter 4, verse 33, with many similar parables, Jesus spoke the word to them. Listen to this part. As much as they could understand. Then he opened their minds so they could understand the scriptures. Sometimes we don't get something intellectually or theologically or spiritual because God's just given us what we can handle. Like if you're a baby and you can only have milk, it doesn't do me much good to cook you a steak, right? That doesn't work that way. In fact, we stopped at Dunkin' Donuts to get donuts this morning because I was doing the teenage class, and it reminded me of the Dunkin' Donut commercial that some of you are too young probably to know, but time to make the donuts, time to make the donuts. Y'all anybody remember that commercial? It's time to make the donuts, time to make the donuts. And sometimes when you have a baby, you feel like that with bottles. It's time to make the bottles, it's time to make the bottles, it's time to make the bottles. And it's just that repetitive kind of thing like that. But, sometimes we're just not able to handle what God needs to give us. We're not ready for it yet. I'm going to come back to that. And when we do that, sometimes we need clarification. They didn't understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him about it. Did you hear that? They were afraid. They didn't understand what he was saying, and they were afraid to ask him about it. And they kept asking, what does he mean by a little while? We don't understand what he is saying. Now, the context implies that they were asking each other, right? They weren't asking Jesus what he was saying. They were asking each other what he was saying. Have you ever done that? You're sitting in a class and the professor says, la, 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 la. And instead of raising your hand and asking the professor what he meant, you turn to the guy sitting beside you who's not any smarter than you are, and you say, hey, what do you mean by that? Well, I don't know what he meant. And you ask the correct. And so you're asking people who don't know the answer because you should be asking the professor. That's the way we get spiritually sometimes. We need to ask for help, but it's really important who we ask. I can find a YouTube video on anything. I can find a YouTube video to probably justify any theological position that I want to find. If I want to really learn about the Bible, I'm just going to tell you, YouTube is probably the last place I'm going. Now, is there some really good stuff on YouTube? Yes. I mean, let's face it, after this afternoon, we're going to be on YouTube, right? Because this broadcast gets sent out to YouTube and it sits out there on the YouTube page. So, not everything out there is bad, but you have to be careful with it, don't you? Even commentaries. Preachers buy commentaries. Did y'all know this? That preachers want to learn stuff. What we do is we buy commentaries. And we buy commentaries and commentaries and commentaries and commentaries and commentaries. Right? And sometimes we call them commentators. The commentator said. If you ever hear us say that. There's this guy that's preaching this little country church, and he kept saying, the commentators don't agree with me. The commentators don't agree with me. The next Sunday, this old lady brought him a bunch of sweet potatoes. I said, well, since the commentators don't agree with you, I thought you might like some sweet potatoes. So commentators. Do I have commentaries? Yes. Shake your head. This is interactive church. Yes, shake your head. I have commentaries. I haven't counted, but I would say I have thousands. I have thousands of commentaries. I'm sure it's thousands. I know there's no books in my office. They're all digital. They're on my iPad back there, but on my computer. Thousands. I can pull up a passage, and it'll show me like 40 commentaries on that passage. I don't even have time to read all of them, right? Is there good information in there? Yes. There's some not so good information in there? Yes, there is. Don't be afraid to ask for help, but be careful who you ask. And sometimes commitment is. Sometimes we just need more time and experience. At first, his disciples did not understand only this. Only after Jesus was glorified did they realize that these things had been written about him and that they had done these things to him. Jesus, when he's washing the disciples' feet, said, you do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand. To be honest, sometimes we have a hard time grasping things because we're just not ready to grasp them. We're just not at the level yet that it's going to make a lot of sense to us. This is really easy to illustrate, right? Who in here can do calculus? It's okay, raise your hand. Calculus people. Calculus people. Okay, Travis, calculus guy. All right, great. Travis, just for the sake of argument, do you think you could put a calculus problem up here that I couldn't understand? Oh, absolutely. Yes, it would take me just a second. In fact, it wouldn't even have to be a hard one. It would be a little easy calculus problem. Why can I not understand it, Travis? I haven't had the background. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to comprehend it. I don't know the right thought process. I'm not there yet. It's like building blocks, and you got to have the building blocks to get there. And if you don't have the building block here, you can't understand something that's over here. Anybody else have a special skill set out there? You know, something better than calculus? Anybody out there know a foreign language? Any foreign language people out there? Charlie, didn't you take French? Okay, I thought you took French. That's okay. Well, you used to know it, right? Yeah, all right. So, did you just pick up the book and all of a sudden you understood? No. We'd drive down the road. Diane's over there. It's before we had kids. Diane's over in the passenger seat. Driving down the road. Here's a question, right? If you're not talking. What's the question if you're not talking? What's wrong, or what are you thinking about? What are you thinking about? Thinking of something really great, right? Well, I wish it were. Luo, lue, slue, luamen, luate, lu, se, luo, lua. I was doing verb conjugations. Doing Greek verb conjugations. Or Hebrew verb conjugations. Katal, katal, ta, katal, te, katal, te, katal, te. I mean, why was I doing those conjugations in my head? Because that's the building blocks to be able to understand what's over here. And if I didn't have the building block here, I can't understand what's over here. How many of you are in school? Come on. How many been to school? A little few, right? How many of you can read cursive? Is there anybody in here who can't read cursive? It's okay. Why can you not read cursive? He wasn't taught. He wasn't taught. He doesn't have the building blocks. Do you realize that when you pick this up and you start reading and you get to a point and you get confused and you get frustrated and you're like, I just can't grasp what's going on here. Sometimes it's because you haven't grown to the level that it makes sense. It's because I'm doing 2 plus 2 and Travis is doing calculus. And I want you to leave here knowing prayer. Guys, prayer. Commentary is important? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And by the way, I love commentaries, right? I love to read those things. But you know, my greatest spiritual understanding doesn't come because I read a commentary. It comes because I've spent time with God in prayer. And I'm asking God to help me understand the Scripture, that I'm asking God to help grant me understanding, that I'm letting the Spirit lead me. Oh, I don't want to do that yet. Sorry, Reggie. So, man, where are you going with all this, Greg? Here's where I'm going with it. Sometimes, right where we started, I feel like the 12. I mean, Jesus has just said something. I'm supposed to immediately get it just like that. And it's supposed to make perfect sense to me. And I'm scratching my head thinking, God, I do not get that at all. And some of you are there. And some of you have been there. And some of you are going to be there. Don't give up. Don't give up. 3 things. I'll start with a P. And that wasn't by design. It just happened that way, right? I'm not usually really good at all things starting with the same letter. Persistence. Persistence. Keep reading. Keep reading. Now, nobody raise their hand, okay? This is not a raise your hand kind of question. This is a think question. This is just a think question, all right? Don't raise your hand. How long has it been since you read through the whole Bible? Genesis to Revelation. Don't matter what kind of program you were using or what kind of Bible app you were using or what kind of reading program you were using. You read Genesis to Revelation. I have a really complicated reading program. Okay, I mean, this is really complicated. I don't think you can get it, but I'm going to tell you what it is. I start in Genesis and end in Revelation. That's how I do mine. It just works good for me. You know, I can put a little marker in there and I know where I'm at. Just read Genesis to Revelation. When you get to the end of Revelation, what do? You start back over with Genesis. Just read Genesis to Revelation, Genesis to Revelation. That's my very complicated reading plan. What do you do when you get to Leviticus? Hey, read it. When you read it, say God is holy. Okay, just keep saying God is holy, God is holy, God is holy. Needs people to be holy. God is holy. That'll help you as you get through. Whoo! What do you get when you get to the genealogy of Jesus? So and so beget, so and so beget, so and so beget, so and so beget. You read it. Persistence. You keep after it. You keep trying. Over and over and over. You know those Greek conjugations and Hebrew conjugations I was doing in my head? How did I learn to do those? Persistence. I would have teachers who would look at me and say, that's how Dr. Floyd would do. I love Dr. Floyd. Dr. Floyd would say, Brother Smith. He'd always call you brother whoever, right? Brother, except one, we had a girl in there. She was sister so-and-so, but that makes sense. But he would say, Brother Smith, what's the answer to this question? And I'd give him the answer, and he would go, oh, Brother Smith. You knew that was wrong, right? That's all I ever got. All I ever got was the wrong answer. Why didn't I quit? Because I wanted to learn it. Persistence. Persistence. Number 2, patience. Patience with yourself. How many of you can raise your hands on this one if you want, how many of you can do the multiplication tables? Anybody know the gazindas? Anybody got your gazindas? You got your gazindas there, Ryan? Y'all know the gazindas? One goes into one time, one goes into two times. You got to have your gazindas. How many of y'all can do that? Did you just wake up one day and you knew your multiplication table and your gazindas? Yeah, pointed to that lady beside him. Yeah, she drilled it into him, right? Part was persistent. Did you get it the first time you tried it? No. Do you have to be patient with yourself if you're going to learn God's truth? Is it important to be patient with yourself? Yes, be patient with yourself. And here's the third one, prayer. Man, just spend time in prayer. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I will read a verse, and honestly, a lot of times this is my reaction. And some of them I still don't know the answer to. Don't pull a kid in its mother's milk. Not meaning kid goat, right? Not kid. I read that verse, and I stop, and I say, God, why did you put that in there? What is that supposed to mean? Now, I got a couple of ideas, but I'm just going to tell you, I'm almost as lost as last year's Easter egg with that. I have been my whole life. Why is it? It's just kind of, all of a sudden, it's in the text. It's like, why is that in the text? You ever read something and you think, okay, God, help me what point are you getting at here? What are you trying to say? How am I supposed to understand this? How am I supposed to apply this? Why did you write this? So always give me some kind of little voice from heaven that says, oh, let me explain this to you. No, not always. Sometimes after looking at a passage and thinking about a passage and meditating on a passage and just over and over and over, is there a time that then the light comes on and you're like, why didn't I see that before? Anybody ever had those? Yes. Where do they come from? Persistence, patience, and prayer. See, I don't want you to leave here thinking, man, I'm frustrated because I just can't seem to learn all this stuff in the Bible, and sometimes it all just doesn't make sense to me, and I don't know what to do with it, and there's some of those verses I just don't know what. Welcome to the club. Welcome to the club. But you know what? It is just full of such understanding and wisdom and guidance if you'll just take time just to meditate on it day and night. Write down a verse on a 3x5 card. Put it in your car. Think about that one verse every day for 7 days. Just one verse. They were great, doesn't that? Can I get more? Well, yeah, just one verse for a week. You know, we picked out an invitation song that really doesn't sound much like an invitation song, to be honest with you. Ancient Words. Somebody ever sung that as an invitation song? Yeah, it's a good song, though. Ancient Words. Here's the thing about the Bible that I love so much. This is why it is such a passion for me. Of all the things that God could have written, this is what he wrote down. He could have written anything that he wanted, right? This is it. This is what he gave you. Well, why didn't he? I don't know why he didn't give you other stuff. But this is what he gave you. These words contain understanding about the nature, the beauty of God. They contain words about how I can live in a way that pleases him. They contain words about how God in his mercy and his grace just reached down and saved my soul, even though I am a worthless, no good, crazy sinner. And if you'll meditate on those words and study those words will change your life. If you need to respond in some way, we'd ask you to do that while we stand and sing.